Hello, everybody. Sorry for that delay. Welcome to the Music Copyright Online Talk series. It is being brought to you by LIVEWIRE, which is a ministry of media and technical arts. We have been serving different churches around the country for the past 10 years, either through consultation, production, or media training. So LiveWire is really well connected to the media people serving in their respective churches, and they are currently based in Penang. And collaborating with LiveWire is the Malaysian Worship Collective, which is a network of musicians and worship leaders who come from different churches across Malaysia. Our vision is to light up Malaysia with heart songs of the land. So we serve up Malaysian worship songs to lift up the name of Jesus while equipping the churches through trainings. So tonight is the first session of this talk series, and we're going to be covering the basic copyright for churches. And with us today is a very, very renowned person. Her name is Sharmila Sikkaran. Sharmila studied law in the UK and graduated with an honors degree in law in economics. She was admitted as an utter barrister to the Bar of England and Wales, and was also admitted as an advocate and solicitor of the High Court of Malaya. Sharmila is currently a partner at Gerald Gomez and Associates, where she specializes in intellectual property law. She also served 5 years in the music industry as head of the Legal and Business Affairs Department of the RIM Group. So if you don't know about the RIM Group, it is the umbrella body which covers the Recording Industry Association of Malaysia, Public Performance Malaysia, RIM Corp Sendirian Berhad, and RIM Digital Malaysia Sendirian Berhad. Sharmila has been invited to speak on various topics on intellectual property enforcement and protection in Malaysia, Singapore, Bangkok, and United Kingdom, as well as on the topics of data protection, the rights to privacy, and justice. So you're really, really in for a treat. I should introduce myself as well. My name is JUWITA SUWITO. I represent the Malaysian Worship Collective, and I will be your moderator for today. Okay, so what's going to happen today is we're going to get Sharmila to share for about half an hour, and then we will open up the time for questions, all right? So wherever you are streaming from, whether it's Facebook Live or YouTube, you can just type in your questions, and we will take them as soon as Sharmila is done with the presentation. Now, in case some of you are watching on the Facebook links, whether on LiveWire or 440 Records page, and you are more comfortable in Mandarin, you can actually head on to the YouTube link, which is in the live chat somewhere up there. Okay, just click on there and you will have a direct Mandarin translation on YouTube. Okay, so before we get started, I think we want to commit this time to God. So let us pray. Lord, I thank you for this evening. I thank you for this opportunity to come together and just to learn more about music copyrights for churches. I want to thank you for each and every person who is tuning in today. I thank you for their heart to serve their local church and the Church of Malaysia as a whole. I also pray, oh God, that even as Sharmila shares, Lord, that you will anoint her lips, let that everything that she shares today be clear, Lord, to each and every one of us. And we commit this time to you. We pray for your protection, even on all the technical aspects. And we commit this time to you, Lord. In Jesus' name, we pray. Amen. All right, so over to you, Sharmila.
Hi, thanks, JUWITA. And hi, good evening to everyone who is joining us online, Facebook and YouTube. This is a really peculiar thing for me because it's one of the first times or very few times that I'm actually speaking to myself. But I really hope I'm able to communicate the issues across to all of you successfully. Thank you very much, Rita, for the introduction, to LiveWire for inviting me, and also to the translator for doing the translation to Mandarin. So I'm just going to keep it quite brief and simple. I know most of you would not have had much understanding or background in copyright. So I'm just going to keep it simple and give you the key basic points or principles that you need to think about. And yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions later. So basically, what is copyright? Well, look at it as a private property right. Think of it as a car, your laptop, your mobile phone, anything that you own that is precious to you. And just think of it as that being akin to copyright, because that's what copyright is. It's an intellectual property right. In Malaysia, it's governed or protected under the Copyright Act of 1987. And basically what it does is that it gives the copyright owner a limited duration monopoly. In Malaysia, the duration is 50 years for copyright. And if you're actually going to be utilizing copyright in other countries or sharing your copyright in other countries, then you need to find out what their copyright term is. Some countries have 70 years, 75 years, 90 years, and so forth. But in Malaysia, it's 50 years. And what this means is that from the time something is copyrighted or becomes copyrighted and protected under copyright, basically what happens is that you can't utilize that person's copyright until the copyright term is over without actually getting any permission or a license. So if I give an example, if someone produces a song, writes a song, the lyrics, the words of a song, and the music to it, and they write it today, you have to wait for the person to pass on, and then you wait for 50 years before that song can be utilized without having to get permission. Any time prior to that, you need their permission or the permission of their estate. In terms of sound recordings, like for example, stuff, Hillsong that you have on YouTube or Spotify or whatever, for sound recordings, it's 50 years from the date of the sound recording. So if something was recorded this year, then you wait for 50 years from next year, 2021, you wait 50 years. And then in 2071, after 2071, the song falls into public domain. And I'll come into that again a bit later. So, okay, it's not moving. There we go. So what works are eligible for copyright? In the Copyright Act of Malaysia, there are 6 categories of works which are copyrighted. And the ones I've highlighted in red that you can see on the screen are actually the ones that perhaps all of you would come into contact with at some point within the church service. I've put literary works because it applies to churches, but more in terms of sermons and for example, if you're going to do a play, a production with music and acting, then literary works comes into it if you're going to do a dramatic work. Otherwise, it's sound recordings, musical works. Now, musical works are basically compositions. It's basically the words of a song and the music, the notes of a song. And film includes music videos, quite apart from cinema films. It also includes music videos. And broadcast includes any kind of broadcast, including what's going on now with broadcasting via Facebook, social media. It includes webcast, broadcast, simulcast, all that kind of thing. So basically, copyright owners, the Copyright Act allows copyright owners to have exclusive right to control any kind of act or utilization of their copyrighted works. Reproduction is basically copying, downloading. So if you download something, a song into your mobile phone, onto your laptop, if you make photocopies of songs, of scores, sheet music for your band, all that falls under reproduction. Communication to the public is broadcasting, basically. any form of transmission of music to the public comes in under communication to the public. Public performance is exactly what it says, which is it includes live performances, but it also includes recorded performances, which are then streamed via video or whatever it is. As long as the public are involved, then that's considered to be a public performance. Distribution to the public is where, for example, something has been recorded, retained, and then shared with the public at a different time. So it could mean, for example, a full-on sermon, a full-on church service with the worship and the sermon and songs of praise and stuff like that, which is recorded, maybe put into a CD and distributed, or VCD and distributed to congregation, or given over to congregation to purchase to raise funds for the church. So that would be distribution to the public. And commercial rental is just where you rent anything which is a work which is copyrighted, where it's rented out to the public. The important thing to take away from this really is just because you have a copy of the work that you've, for example, downloaded from iTunes or Spotify or whatever, or even if you've purchased a CD or it's sheet music that you've purchased, it does not give you, it gives you ownership of that piece of paper, it gives you ownership of the CD that you have purchased, but it does not give you ownership of the copyright, of the content of the music sheet or the CD or whatever it is, the song that you've downloaded. So you need to make sure that if you're going to utilize, for example, a CD, the songs in a CD or a Hillsong song, say, for example, or one of Don Moen's YouTube uploads, if you're going to utilize it, you need to make sure that you have been given the rights to utilize it in the way you want to utilize it. The only right you are given at the moment is the right to use it for private and domestic use. So if you want to use it for public and or commercial use, then you need to get permission. And copyright protection extends to anything which is the original work of a person. And basically there needs to be a certain sufficient effort put into the creation for it to be copyrighted. It needs to be something which has been used into material form. That means it's written down, it's recorded, it's downloaded and stored in some kind of material form that where you can then reproduce it or extract it from that form. So even if you download it onto your computer, onto your laptop, your handphone, your mobile phone, and you extract it, then that kind of thing is copyrighted. And it doesn't matter the quality, whether you think it's a good piece of work or not, it is still copyrightable. And copyright also attaches to derivative works. So what we mean by derivative works are, for example, if you take an original song and you adapt it, you vary it. If you take, for example, Amazing Grace, which all of us know, the hymn Amazing Grace, it was written originally to be either sung by individuals without accompaniment, or it was sung in churches with the great pipe organs and, you know, the big sound of the church organs. But today you have different worship groups maybe jazzing it up or modernizing it slightly. So while the original work was copyrighted, because it's so long ago, it's beyond 50 years or even 90 years of the passing of the author, the person who wrote it. So it is now in the public domain, but every variation of it has its own separate copyright protection. And that's important for all of you to know as well, because as music leaders or worship leaders, you may take a song and vary it. You need to get permission to utilize the song or get a license to utilize the song if it's going to be for public use. But the variation that you have created has its own copyright protection. And, you know, sometimes it's important for you to know and remember that, because who knows, you know, some of you could be the next Hillsong. So there are different elements of copyright. And this is something that a lot of people struggle with. It's like peeling an onion, you know, it's not just one layer, there are lots of layers. So the first layer really would be a copyright in the composition, in the musical work. Like I said, the lyrics and the music that goes with the lyrics. On top of that, someone has taken the trouble to make a recording of that. So in the sound recording itself, there are various copyrights that would attach. And on top of that, if you're using someone else's performance, for example, you buy a CD or a DVD and you're using that within your church service or for your whatever particular needs of your worship team, then the person, the performer who's singing the songs also has a copyright attaching to the performance. So like I say here, there's copyright in the specific performance, there's copyright in the composition, there may be separate copyright in the words of the song. And for example, if you're taking someone else's praise and worship, so where they're actually also praising God and praying and speaking, then there's copyright in that. And then there's copyright in the sound recording and the arrangement that they've utilized. So if you do not get permission and authorization to use copyrighted works in the manner that you want to use it, then it's considered a violation of the rights. It's a breach of copyright, or other. The Copyright Act uses the word infringement. And it's important to know that infringement is both a civil wrong, i.e. you can be sued in the civil courts, but it's also a criminal wrong. You can be sued in the criminal courts. You can face a term of imprisonment, or it could just be a fine. If it's in the civil courts, then the copyright owner can ask for payment of damages, either actual damages or statutory damages. They can even ask for an account of profit. So for example, if you used their music and you've created something that you've then sold, they may ask for the profits that you have reaped from the sale of the use of their copyrighted work. They can also ask for injunction to prevent you from continuing the breach. In Malaysia, what is very popular is they ask for a public apology to be published, usually in one of the major newspapers. And of course, you could be asked to pay the cost of proceedings. It is important to note that just because you're using it for church purposes and you may not be making very much money out of it, is not a defense for a breach of copyright. So it's always important to know where the copyrights lie, who owns the copyright, and to get the right kind of the level of permission for what you want to use it for the purpose that you want to utilize the copyright work for. So the Copyright Act requires you to obtain a license from the copyright owner. And very often when you, for example, like I said, purchase a CD, if you, it's not so obvious when you download, but the same principle applies when you download something from iTunes. But if you go and look at a physical CD, if you have access to one still, they're getting obsolete very, very quickly. But if you go and look at the CD, and if it's an original CD, not a pirated copy, you will see that there is something somewhere on the leaf of the CV, of the CD, it'll be written that it's only for private use. It is not for public or commercial use. So the scope of that license is for you to use it in your private and domestic purpose. But if you get a license, then you need to know what you're going to use the recording for or the copyrighted work for, and ensure that your license covers that. So most licenses cover the right, for example, to only perform the music in church, and maybe either a live performance or to allow the sound recording, the song, to be played in church. It may not, and usually does not, grant you a license to also stream and broadcast the song or the performance. So if you could get permission from the owner, from let's say Don Moen, who's a prolific worship songwriter, and you get permission for him to perform his song in your church to lead in worship in your church, he may not have given you automatic rights to also broadcast or stream that performance, your live performance, using his work. So you need to get that permission. Otherwise, you could be found in breach of his copyright. That's just as an example. So if you are unable to get a license, or if you don't have the funds to get a license, you don't want to get a license, it is really important that at the very least, you get permission from the copyright owner in writing. So write to the person or the copyright owner, ask for permission to use it, say what the scope of your use and purpose of your use is going to be, and make sure that you get a written response that it's okay to use, and keep a record of that in the church files, so that if anyone has any issues with whether a permission was granted, it won't be an issue. So one of the things is that, given the breadth of music that the church uses, we also use a lot of secular music. For example, Josh Groban's "You Lift Me Up," right? Which is actually found more in the secular world. So it's important for us to know where to go and get the rights from, the licenses from. And what happens in a lot of countries is that a lot of the copyright owners, music copyright owners, have set up collective bodies, or in Malaysia, they call licensing bodies. And they administer the collective administration of licenses, music licenses. So in Malaysia, we've got 3. MACP looks after musical works, so it's composers, lyricists, music publishers. PPM represents the recording labels, the sound recording companies. RPM, and you don't really need to know RPM so much, but they could represent the recording performers. Only important if you want to become a recording performer and have your music played commercially. But it's important for you to know MACP and PPM for the purposes of utilizing someone else's musical works or sound recordings. But the important thing to note here is that usually the secular world in Malaysia does not cover Christian music. So work that is like gospel songs or stuff which is written specifically for churches and for worship, more often than not, does not always fall in under the secular labels and publishers. So you really need to find out. Some of it does, but they're usually the larger companies, the more global companies like Warner Music and Sony and Universal. But in the US and in the UK, they do have collective administration of licenses just specifically for Christian music. And CCLI is one of the big ones. There are a couple of others in the UK and the US. So you can actually just very quickly Google this as well. So if you're in doubt as to who administers the rights in Malaysia, what you can do is just get in touch with them and say, I want to use these songs or this music. Can you tell me who owns it and who I can get a license from in Malaysia, or whether they are willing to license you out of the UK or the US or even Australia. Like I mentioned, all copyrighted work needs to get a license, but there are a couple of exceptions. So there are works that I mentioned that have fallen, that have fallen into the public domain. And this is really works which used to belong to someone, but they don't anymore, or works to whom we do not know, anonymous works. We do not know who the copyright owner is, and the copyright owner is untraceable. Then very often these works would have fallen into the public domain. And all works, intellectual property, which is in the public domain, is not protected by copyright law. So you can utilize it without obtaining a permission or having to get a license. However, what you need to make sure is that do not presume that a particular work that you're using is in the public domain. So the example I gave you just now was Amazing Grace, which is a very, very, very old song, the words of which I can tell you are 100% in the public domain, or the main words of it are in the public domain. But what someone has done more recently is you find like a lot of churches or worship teams adding verses to a pre-existing hymn. So if you're going to utilize those new additions, then you need to check whether when you use sing the song Amazing Grace in its new format in the entirety with the additional verses, you need to make sure whether those verses are in the public domain. Do not presume that they are just because the earlier verses are. And if they're not, then you need to find out who the owner is and get permission. You also need to check whether a version or an arrangement of the work is in the public domain. So again, a lot of people have sung and recorded a lot of music which was in the public domain, but they are new recordings or they're new arrangements. So those works are not in the public domain. And if you're going to use it in church, then you need to make sure that you're using work which is in public domain and you do not need permission to use. Or if you're going to use work which is not in the public domain, then you need to go and find out who the copyright owner is and get their permission. The other exemption is what we call fair use or fair dealing, depending on which country you're in, fair use or fair dealing. And the law generally specifies very specifically that the right to control, if you remember, I said that Section 7 of the Act gives the copyright owner exclusive right to control the doing of certain works, reproduction, public performance, and so forth. But this is an exemption. The right to control does not include incidental inclusion of a work. What does that mean? It means that, for example, now as I'm doing this presentation and speaking to all of you, if JUWITA, who's listening in, is playing music in the background unintentionally, and you are hearing it, it's going to be broadcast because you're listening in, but it's incidental to the broadcast. It's not part and parcel of this presentation and what I'm sharing with you. So in that case, then it would not be the copyright owner of the music that JUWITA is playing in the background will not have any claim in terms of copyright for the broadcast of the sound recording. Similarly, with if the use of the copyrighted work is for teaching, like in Sunday schools, or you want to teach kind of like the choir or vocal training, that kind of thing, then it would not be, it would come in under fair use, so you do not have to get a license. As well as, and this is the important one for the church, where the performance of the work is by a non-profit entity or organization, where the performance is for charitable or educational purpose, and where no admission fee is charged. You need these three elements for it to be termed fair use. So if you only have non-profit entity or organization, but it is not for charitable or educational purpose, then it does not fall under this exemption of fair use. Or if you're going to charge admission fees, so if the church is, for example, doing a fundraiser and they've sold raffle tickets, or you have like an entrance fee to come in, you got to pay a small fee just to enter, two ringgit fee. Then again, if there's music playing in the background, that does not come in under fair use or fair dealing. So all three elements need to operate. It's also important to find out whether your church is registered under charitable entity or charity or charitable organization. If you come from one of the sort of like more ecumenical and apostolical churches, the Catholic and Apostolic churches, so I'm talking about the Catholic Church, the Anglican Church, the Methodist Church, the Lutheran Church, then most of them operate under a special law, a special statute. They are statutory bodies, and in the statute, it states that they are charitable. But if you are coming from one of the more, the AOG churches, very often they're set up as organization as societies, associations under ROS, or they're set up as Berhad. So you need to find out whether you are a charitable entity, but you can claim charitable status by being a religious organization. But again, the important thing to note here is that the use of the music for public performance must be for charitable purpose. So just because your church may be termed a charitable entity or a charity, or that fall in under that classification or categorization of body or organization, if the purpose for which you're using the music is not charitable, then you can't claim fair use. Okay, so I hope that's clear. It is not a defense of fair use where you reproduce a work just because it's out of print, which happens to a lot of the older hymns or worship songs. So these are some of the activities that may involve copyright issues, where you reproduce hymns. The most common example today is where a lot of churches have done away with the actual hymnals, and they are now projecting the words of the songs that are being sung, the worship songs that are being sung, onto big screens. So someone has taken the trouble to type out, to reproduce those words into some kind of digital format, and then that's being screened or projected onto a screen in the church. That is reproduction of the words. So if you're doing that with your worship songs, you need to be careful as to whether you have the right to do that. Again, if you're going to make photocopies of the music or of worship songs and share it with your band or with whoever the worship team is, you need to be careful about whether you are entitled to do that. That's considered reproduction. Both these are reproductions of the original work. Again, if you're going to use audio or video recordings, the most common example is where, it's, they often show a video, for example, in weddings, they often show videos of the bride and groom, say, for example, or the family, and they've got music synchronized, playing interspersed, playing in the background as the images, the photos of the bride and groom change. That's called synchronization of an original recording. So that would actually involve copyright issues. Again, performance of live music, because you're using someone else's musical works, notes and lyrics. Or if you're using -1 tapes, sound recordings, -1 recordings, that again would be an issue of copyright. As well as, reproduction for the purposes of storage, as well as where, for example, the entire service, like I was saying earlier, is recorded and stored within the church database, and can be used later on, for example, for the church's 50th anniversary or whatever. That would be reproduction of copyrighted material. And then, of course, live streaming. So specifically for worship, these are some of the areas that you really need to know and understand and get where you need permission. So music performed by the choir. If you're using a legal source or a legal copy of the music, then you're okay. But if you're reproducing it or making copies, then permission is required, either written permission or license. If you're, for example, again, live music during a church service, usually church services, weddings, funerals are all exempted. This includes lyrics which are then printed onto the, like when you go for a wedding, they often give out a little booklet containing the order of service. And very often the words of the hymns or worship songs are printed there. So usually it's exempted, the reproduction of those words would be exempted, but not if it's for a non-church service or non-service purpose. For example, where music is being played at a social event. I've already covered lyrics projected onto a screen during the service. as well as recording of music in worship for later video broadcast, then you need permission for that purpose. Recording of performances on CDs and DVDs, which you then may sell or distribute. So if you remember, one of the things that I showed you right at the start is that distribution to the public is the exclusive right to control of the copyright owner. And if you distribute CDs or VCDs synchronized or containing copyrighted works, then especially where you've sold it and you've made money for the church, then you need to be careful that you're not in breach of the copyright laws. Similarly, where choir performances, church performances are uploaded onto social media, and I will cover that a little bit later in greater detail, because I think this is something that you all are actually dealing with a lot now. Use of video clips, again, you need to get permission. So it covers things like Hillsong video clips, as well as if you're using film, like for example, The Passion of Christ. If you want to use that as the backdrop of a church worship CD or DVD or performance, then again, that's considered synchronization and you need to get permission. So live streaming or broadcast over the internet, webcast, it also includes podcasts, is really not exempted under fair use or works that fall under public domain. The important thing to note, especially when you're using social media, is that most social media, I've reproduced what YouTube term and conditions is, what it states there, but very similar for a lot of the other social media sites, including Facebook. Really, what they require you to do is to ensure that you upload, that you get permission to use third-party content, which has been copyrighted, and that you're able to show that you have obtained permission or a license. And if you're unable to do that, then a lot of the social media sites have algorithms which work in the background. So when you upload something or if you stream something, like for example, if music was going to be streamed now, in the background of the YouTube transmission or the Facebook transmission, at the background of that, there are little bots that are working and algorithms are being worked out, and they match those algorithms with their existing database. And when they match it with the existing database, if they find a match with a copyrighted song that has already been uploaded into the database, then immediately you will get a notice to say that your work is potentially infringing someone else's copyright, a third-party copyright. Basically, they will either block it or they will, they will temporarily block it, or they will permanently take down your stream, such that whoever's viewing or trying to connect will not be able to get it. So you may wonder why it is that sometimes you have uploaded your church worship and people say, oh, but I can't view it. And there's a little thing that comes up on YouTube that says that this content has been taken down or there's a breach of copyright. It's because perhaps you've been using a -1 tracking or something which connects with the database of the social media platform that you're utilizing. And that is what is taking down or blocking the viewership from accessing what you've uploaded because it's in breach of copyright. So like I mentioned earlier, the traditional licenses, the right to, for example, perform musical works does not cover the content or the display or broadcast or live streaming of content on a third-party website or on a social media platform. So you also are usually not granted synchronization rights. And what do I mean by synchronization rights? Basically, it is where you use music as the background to something else that you're doing. So if you're doing a performance, like I said just now, if you're doing a performance and you've got music in the background, then the music is being synchronized with the performance. Okay, and that requires a separate or a different license. So if you're going to reach out to a copyright owner to get a license, it's important for you to know why what you're going to use the license for, what you're going to use the music for, to inform the copyright owner so that you can get the right permission and the right license to cover the entirety of what you're doing. So I've just put up on screen here, which I hope y'all can take away with you or see, just a suggestion of what I think would be the best way forward. And that would be to outline the entire service or use of the copyrighted works, prepare a plan for the order of service, list the various component parts of the service, in particular the songs that you intend to perform. And you've got to know, so it's not just songs performed by the worship band, but even if you're, for example, doing communion or doing receiving collection, paying your tithes and doing your collection, the congregation sings hymns or songs, then you need to list all that down and make sure that you have the copyright license. You also, like I said, need to know why you're using or how that the songs or the recordings are going to be utilized. Is it just live performance within a traditional church service? Is the church service being recorded, videoed, and stored? Is the church service being live streamed? Or is it being recorded and it's going to be broadcast or uploaded onto YouTube at a later stage? How and for what purpose is the license that you require going to be used for? And then you can then go ahead and get the right kind of license or ensure that you are not in breach of copyright, basically. So as a suggestion, in particular, when you are doing live streaming or uploading content which has been recorded, maybe if you're going to utilize recordings or music that perhaps could or does infringe copyright, then what you can do is to prepare an alternative. So as the live church service is going on, and let's say right now we're going to sing a hymn or show a video or whatever, which could potentially breach copyright as this service is being streamed live, then what you would do is, although it's being shown live in church, you would have an alternative content that you would put up for your online viewers, which is not in breach of copyright. So that's one way of getting around some of the streaming of copyrighted content, which would otherwise be blocked or taken down by your social media, by your the platform on which you're broadcasting. And so with that, that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Wow, thank you so much, Sharmila. That was amazing. Even as a person who had some experience with, the world of music and copyright a little bit, it's still a lot to digest. But you would be happy to know that we have 200 people tuning in, streaming right now, listening to everything that you are telling them and just digesting slowly. So I will go straight to some of the questions. Some were asked earlier and you've already touched on it, but I will ask the questions again because, again, there's a lot to digest. So I'll just ask the questions anyway. Okay, let's see. Question number 1. Okay, I'll just go in order because there are a lot, okay? Is there a sample for a church to get the license to use the song for online service? So if I have is there a sample or a template to ask for that permission?
I'm sure one can be created. I'm not aware of a sample, but basically it's really all you need to do is to know what, like I said just now, know what songs you're singing. So like I said, You Lift Me Up, Amazing Grace, and, As the Deer Pants for the Water, just 3 examples. So you need to know who the copyright owner is. Very easy to find out today. just Google it. It's available on YouTube, it's available on Google. So just find out who the copyright owner is. If you find out that it's one of the big recording companies. So for this, I'm just going to go into a little bit more detail. If you consider the big labels, we have Universal, Warner, and Sony here. They are the recording companies, but under them, they have many different labels. So some of them actually do cover Christian music. So again, if you just Google it, Wikipedia or whatever, and you find out that it's a label under one of these three, you can quite quickly call them up and find out whether their music, because they are members of, like I mentioned, they are members of MACP and PPM. So if you're using music from a variety of the music companies and authors, then you need to find out whether MACP and PPM have the right or the mandate to issue licenses, and then you just go to MACP and PPM and get the license from them. But if you find out that, no, okay, all these songs that we're going to sing belong to one of these people, one of the labels, and one of the songwriters, then what you do is you just go to them and contact them and say, I want to use this music in this manner. I need to get the license. What do I do? And they will guide you through the process. With music, the lyricists and the songwriters, it's a little bit more difficult because, as you can imagine, sometimes one song could have even up to 5 songwriters and lyricists, different people writing different parts, different verses, different parts of the music, or even more. You know, I'm just saying 5, but it could be more, it could be less. It's not just one person. So usually the better option would be to go to MACP and say, look, I need to get a license for this purpose. Can you help me? And if they can't, then you can ask them to give you guidance or direction as to what you can do. Like I said, again, a lot of the music that we perform in terms of, and I'm really talking about the English services. I'm not too familiar with, for example, Chinese, Mandarin, Cantonese services or Tamil services, the non-English services. You have to know that translation. So if you're going to sing a hymn which has been translated into BM, say, for example, then the translation has a different copyright as versus the English original. So you need to get a permission to use both the song, the music, as well as the Malay translation. So a lot of this is today quite easily available online. And you can actually go back and find out who the copyright owners are. And it's actually a very simple process of saying, this is what I want to do. How do can I get your permission to do it? And if I need to pay, how much do I need to pay? I hope that answers the question.
Maybe I can just share a brief experience that I had about 10 years ago when I was coming out with my first album. There was this song that I wanted to do that I dare not sing now because I might infringe some rights. But it was a very familiar benediction. And I remember looking up, who's a songwriter, and it said Olive Wood. And for the life of me, I could not find who Olive Wood was. But thankfully, they had publishers written on the thing. And like you said, Google. So I called up and I asked, how do I get the rights? Thankfully, that song, they had already, although the songwriter was alive, they had already put it in public domain or something like that. Like he had relinquished it to public domain or something. And I got the clearance quite easily, so I kept the email. So that might be helpful. Sometimes it sounds daunting, but sometimes actually it's not really that hard. I suppose the tough part is having to do that for about 5-6 songs every week for your church, which brings me to the next question, which is, can we know how to come about in getting the license for church service as well as an online service? So you mentioned something about CCLI. You want to say a little bit more about that, perhaps?
Yeah. So like I said, now, because a lot of church services are doing things, well, churches are moving online a lot more. And certainly it's happening a lot in the US, but I think you will see it happen here as well, where a lot of churches are going to put even physical services on YouTube online for access, for anyone around the world who wants to listen to that pastor's sermon and participate in the church service. So, like I said, because you're moving in that direction, when you ask for the original license to perform, just say, and also to stream and to broadcast online, can I have that license? JUWITA, was that the question?
Yeah, how do we get permission to do online? Yeah.
Yeah, so in the same way that you would get any kind of permission, you would write to the copyright owner. So like JUWITA explained just now, and I was saying, you just Google to find out who the copyright owner is. And when you write to them, ask for permission to also not just use it in your live performance or your church service, but also inform that your church service is going to be recorded or it's going to be streamed live, and that you would like the license to cover that, so that you can then stream it or put it and store it and broadcast it on YouTube or whatever social media platform that you choose. Like I also mentioned, if you just Google CCLI, Christian Copyright License International, and you'll see a whole bunch of there are about 3 or 4 of them in the US. There are some in the UK and Australia. Those are the ones I'm aware of, the bigger ones. I'm sure that if you are in the Chinese service, whether it's Mandarin or Cantonese, I'm sure there will be something similar in Taiwan and places like that. China, perhaps, although I'm not too familiar with China, because there's a lot of change happening so fast in China. Similarly, there's a lot of Tamil music coming out of India. So if you just, like I said, if you just Google it, you'll find out, and just inform them that you want to use it for online purposes. CCLI is, like I said, a collecting body, a collective licensing body, so that you don't have to go to individual copyright owners. Like JUWITA said, in one church service, you may have 6 or more music pieces that you need copyright clearance for. It's going to be really hard to do this diligently and to make sure that you've got the licenses, you followed up, that kind of thing. So if you go to CCLI and any of the big collector bodies, and you just give them a full list, maybe the kind of, a list, because a lot of the church services, you end up kind of repeating some of the hymns and the worship songs. So if at the start of the year, the worship team have an idea of, the kinds of music they're going to be performing for the entire year, then you just write that down, send a list off to them and say, we need clearance for all these, 100, say, for example, 100 hymns or worship songs. Can we get a license for them? And we need a license for this purpose, which will include online broadcast, will include streaming, live streaming. And then they will come back to you, and then you can take it from there.
Great. That's a great suggestion, actually. But you just have to be a bit more organized at the beginning of the year to get it all down, right? And get the publishers or the sound recording permission. Okay, we're going to change gears a little bit. There are questions about uploading your own covers to YouTube or Instagram or IG Live and things like that. So these 2 questions are kind of similar. I'll just read them both so you can answer them together. Okay, so I would like to know if it's okay to make a cover song and post them to media platforms such as YouTube, Instagram, FB for online service due to the current situation. And then a similar question is, what is fair use? A lot of YouTube videos talk about allowing of usage of copyrighted items that fall under this. Yeah, there is one more that is also kind of related. So I don't know if you want to cover them together. Could you explain more on what is private use? So if it is a closed screening of a film or a video, so if I've done my own church program into one video and it's uploaded to YouTube, but it's only for a limited, like it's a Zoom meeting and they're watching that, it's not broadcast live, is that considered private use, or is that copyright? Is that infringing copyrights as well?
So I'll answer the last question first. Even a Zoom meeting is considered live streaming. So you still need the right to stream live if you're using music. Okay, so that covers the limited Zoom meeting. It is not considered. Sorry.
So just a question. Is there a number? Like, what if it was 2 people or 3 people? Is there a maximum number if it was a Zoom meeting?
Yeah, as long as, so private use is it's your household. Anything beyond that could be defined as public. So because it is something that's going out of my private domain into a public via, it's communications of public, it is broadcast, because like if I'm doing a performance now and you are seeing the performance, then the only way you're seeing it is because it's being communicated to the public, communicated to you. Even though it's a limited viewership, it is still considered public because you are the public. Okay? Private is me. Private is the 4 walls that I reside in. Anything beyond that is considered public.
Okay. That makes sense, because even if you play music in a small cafe and there are 10 people there, it's already public broadcast, right?
Absolutely. Public broadcast also covers, for example, where music is played, like background music is played by employers for their employees. So if you imagine an office that you need a pass to get into, so it is a protected space in that sense. It's not open to the public where all of us can just wander in and walk in as we please. It's only for the employees of the employer. The employees were considered, this case law on this, the employees were considered public for the purposes of public performance of music.
Okay.
So
that puts into context, right? So it's public. Okay, cool.
But like I said, if it's happening during a service, then it falls back into whether it is a charitable purpose. Most religious services are deemed charitable purposes. Religious and charitable purposes is the wider terminology. So usually if it's a church service, then it's deemed fair use. So then you would not necessarily need to get a license. But because it's being streamed and broadcast, that is where the license or requirement for license comes in.
Okay.
I forgot the first question.
Uploading covers to YouTube or other social media platforms. What was the question? Let's see.
Conversion, that's right.
Yeah.
Conversion. So conversion is basically where you use someone else's musical work, someone else's lyrics, someone else's music. You may adapt it and make it your own, jazz it up, say, for example, but it doesn't detract from the fact that the original music still has copyright attached to it. So you need permission to utilize the words and the music, which you are then going to vary, adapt, and make your own. But you first need permission to use that original work. When you record and upload your own version of it, a new copyright attaches to that version. So if someone else wanted to use it or play it or whatever, you are entitled to charge royalties or to allow them to use it within a specific purpose or not, because separate copyright attaches to that.
Okay. So I think related to that question is, does YouTube, for example, have a blanket license? Like a lot of people are uploading covers, and they have it tracked to the songwriter, which it says, okay, so your song has been tracked to this song writer, and it's okay, you're cool, but you can't monetize it, that's all. So does YouTube have this thing covered? So does that mean that people doing covers of worship songs or whatever not have to worry about getting permission per se?
What YouTube does is like I said, because of the algorithms, if those songs are connected with YouTube's database, then yes, you can upload it. There's a separate issue as to whether copyright has been breached, because whether you have the right to record that song is separate to the fact that you've uploaded it. And what will now happen is that it'll be monetized at YouTube end, so that you will not get any, you will not be able to monetize your cover version. It is the copyright owner, the owner of the lyrics and the word and the songs, the music. Because you've done a cover version, it's that person. If there is any monetization to be done, all the money will go to them.
Okay, got that. Okay, next question. This one is quite cool. What is the worst penalty if copyright is infringed in Malaysia? Who will be pleaded guilty? So for example, if a church member covered a song without permission, representing the church, online or public, found guilty, who goes to jail?
Okay, so actually, more than likely, it'll be a civil suit rather than a criminal action. Really, criminal actions are where someone has pirated something. But something like this would be considered a civil wrong. So there will not be any, it's unlikely unless the copyright owner is really, really nasty and wants to see the pastor go to jail.
Okay.
It's usually will be tried in the civil courts. But so the penalty will have to be paid. Again, it really depends. Like if you look at the worship team, say, for example, the worship leader, it really depends on the relationship between the worship leader or the worship team and the church and the church leadership. So if everything is approved and endorsed by the pastor, by the church board, by the church elders, then there will be some level of liability on them. But if there has been some kind of separation where, the church basically allows the worship leader or the worship team to do their own songs and to make sure that they are all legit, then both the worship leader and the worship team, as well as, so basically the person who's committed the direct act of infringement, which includes the band as well as the church leadership, the pastor, the church board, both parties or sets or groups of people could be found to be liable for the act of infringement. So it's really hard to give a solid answer. It really depends on the relationship and the breakdown of the facts. But everyone from the people who perform in the band right up to or the people choosing the song and instructing the performance, right up to the church board, elders, pastors, depending again on the way the church is, where the leadership of the church is, could be found liable.
Okay, so interesting. Just now you mentioned that most churches fall under the charitable category. But if you're streaming, then it's no longer charitable? And yeah.
So, well, I mean, it's important to find out whether your church falls under, is deemed a charity or not. That's the first thing. Most religious organizations do, but because of the unique position that Christians and churches are in Malaysia, like I mentioned, the Anglican Church and the Catholic Church in Malaysia have been set up under statute. So there's a legislation, there's an act establishing or setting them up. Whereas that does not apply to the Assembly of God churches because the AOG churches came in later, post-Merdeka. They came in later. So in that sense, they were not really in the mind or envisaged at the time that a lot of the laws were being drafted. So a lot of these churches are, you need to go and find out how your church is registered. Is it a society? Is it registered under the Registrar of Societies? Is it registered as a company, as a Berhad? Is it limited liability? You need to find out. Is it set up as a foundation? Different churches have applied different ways. There are a lot of churches that are just kind of like, meeting shop lots, and they're not really, have not really been legally established as a church. That puts you in an even more precarious position for a variety of reasons. But for our purposes, you need to find out. But the fair use exemption is not in respect of the entity, but in respect of the purpose. So if the purpose is for teaching, for education, and religious instruction can fall in under that, then fair use comes into play. But once it transcends or goes beyond that, then you can't apply the fair use exemption.
Okay. So worship is not educational, correct?
Not in and of itself.
Okay.
Like I mentioned, a lot. Things may change as the entire world moves towards a more online presence, and churches are moving and having a more online presence. Who knows? The way copyright is being administered will also change, very likely. And you may find that in 5, 10, I don't know how many years down the line, that when you apply for a license, it automatically includes and covers online live streaming or online broadcast. At the moment, because all this was never envisaged at the time that a lot of the music that we are using today was first created and licensed, it really was not envisaged for this purpose, and therefore the license doesn't cover it.
Interesting. Okay, we have a question 10. We actually had a lot of questions. Is it necessary to copyright original worship compositions if it's not published for monetary purposes? If so, how do we apply for a copyright for that composition?
So it's really up to you. Okay, so the thing to know is that copyright applies or attaches to a work product the minute it's reduced into material form. So I've just done a presentation. I've prepared some slides. Those slides, copyright already attaches to those slides. It's my personal work product. It's reduced into a material form because it's saved onto my computer hard disk. I can extract it from a computer hard disk and put it onto USB. I can email it out. I can put it onto the cloud. I can do a whole bunch of things with it. I can reproduce it and print it out into physical, onto paper. I can do so many things with it. So basically, that already from the moment I created it and reduced it into material form, copyright already attaches to that. Same with anything that any of you are creating, okay? If it's just an idea, so like all this stuff that I'm saying to you now, because it's not being recorded, or certainly I've not recorded it, I know the organizers are recording it, so it is reduced into material form. But say that it's not, then a lot of this are just perhaps ideas or concepts, and they are not copyrightable. Okay, so it must be reduced into material form, or a material format that can be that is tangible, that can be held, touched, carried away, and transmitted or transposed. So that's the first thing about something that is copyrighted. So when you produce something, automatically copyright attaches to it. It's up to you to decide how you want that copyright to attach and use, and to be used. So there is something called copyright free. So there are people who write music and they just put it out there in the public space, and they say, oh, you can just use it as long as you attribute it to me. In which case you don't have to get my permission, but you need to attribute to me the fact that I've created that music. And there are different limitations or restrictions or permissions granted with regards anything that's copyrighted. So I don't know, while you saw the presentation online, some of you may have taken photographs of it. Copyright attaches to the presentation itself, but copyright now also attaches to the photograph that you took on your handphone, or if you kind of like took it from the your computer or laptop that you were using. Copyright attaches to that piece of work because the photograph belongs to you now, and it's reduced into a material form in your handphone. So when you talk about music that you perform, or that you that copyright can attach to your own personal work product, you can allow it to be put out there for public use without any permission being required. But what you might want to say is that you can use it, but only for this purpose. So you cannot commercialize the music. You can use it for your church services. You can use it to stream as background music. You can use it as synchronization in your wedding album, but you cannot commercialize it. You cannot make money out of it. And if someone makes money out of it, then you may want to charge them a fee because they've benefited from your work product. So that's that's why it says that copyrighted work is the exclusive right to control of the copyright owner, how the work is going to be used, how the work is going to be reproduced, performed, distributed, whatever.
Okay, got that. Are you there, Sharmila? Okay, cool. Okay, so I think part of the question also was how do I get my song copyrighted? Is there a process? What do I do?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't answer that. Yeah. So basically, like I said, copyright already attaches, but the way you prove that you have copyright in the song, the best thing to do is as soon as you have reduced it into material format. So whether it's the lyrics of a song that you've written down, so if it's something that you're reducing into, let's say on a piece of paper, onto your manuscript, the musical notes that you've written onto a manuscript, or even if you're singing a song and you're recording it in your phone, what you need to do is reduce it on a material form. And very often you would prepare a statutory declaration. You would attach a copy of your copyrighted work. So if it's the lyrics of a song, you would attach that to your statutory declaration. If it's a recording that you have put onto a USB or a CD or something like that, you would attach the CD or the USB or the recording to your SD, your statutory declaration, and you would take that to a commissioner for oaths, and you would pay, it's usually just 10 ringgit for something really small like that. You pay him 10 ringgit to basically affirm the fact that you have come before him on that particular day, swearing that the work that is contained in this, whether it's that piece of paper or CD or USB or whatever it is, that work is your work and the copyright belongs to you. And once you've done that, what you would do is, and a statutory declaration, there are samples, I think you should find them online, but basically it's very simple. All it says is that I, Shamila Sekaran, IC number or passport number or whatever, of whatever address, having a home address at whatever in Petaling Jaya, I hereby affirm, swear that, state that I am the author, the creator, the songwriter, the performer, the whatever of whatever piece of work which is attached or next to this and marked as an extra one or schedule one or attachment one, whatever you want to call your piece of paper or your that attachment, which I created on whatever date. And then you would take that piece of paper, that document, to the Commissioner for Oaths, sign it in front of him, get him to affirm the date. And what you would do is you would seal that into an envelope and post it back to yourself. Put a stamp on it, put it in the post box, have it sent back to yourself. And once you have done that, once you sent it back to yourself, ensure that it stays sealed, because if someone were to question whether or not you are the original copyright owner of that work product, you will then pull this document out and open it in front of the court or in front of, someone who's going to verify this, that it was sealed and not tampered with. And that, yes, indeed, the Commissioner of Votes you did appear before the Commissioner of Votes, and therefore, whatever you're saying in that document is true. One of the other things you can do is the Copyright Act was amended in 2012 to allow for copyright registration. Copyright registration is not mandatory, unlike trademarks. So trademarks are logos, and unlike the trademarks, those have to be registered if you want to claim infringement. But copyright does not have to be registered. But what the government has done is it allowed into the Copyright Act and amended the Act to allow for voluntary registration of copyright. Again, with that, you go to the Malaysian Intellectual Property Organization, and that, Malaysian Intellectual Property Office. They are very near the Bangsa LRT station at Menara or Wisma UOA. Just kind of, the LRT station kind of just comes straight into them. You go there, you ask for the copyright department, and you can go and submit your copyrighted work. Again, you need to have it in a material format, whether it's on CD or USB or on a piece of paper, whatever. You need to take that into them and fill in their forms and do the necessary, and they will store it for you. So that at some stage, if someone questions, again, there's a court case or someone is questioning your copyright, you can then go to them and get them to give you an extract. They'll give you a certificate, basically, that you're the owner of this piece of work. And you can then produce that as proof that you are the copyright owner.
Okay, so what you're saying, if I'm hearing correctly, if there are people writing worship songs out there and they want to copyright, so of course they can also sign up with MACP or CCLI, but it is also better for them to go and register it with the Intellectual Property Office. Is that right?
Yes, but MACP and CCLI do not prove your copyright. You have to prove your copyright. Okay. So they only administer your rights, which means that if someone wants to use your copyright, instead of having to come and look for you and you be bothered and harassed by various people who want you to license your work to them, you will send them to MACP, or they will contact MACP, and MACP will administer that for you.
Right.
Or
Okay.
but in terms of proving copyright, you need to
Prove it yourself. Okay, cool. We're going to close shortly. There's just one standout question that is kind of different from the rest, which is, so if I use media for Sunday school, will that be covered as educational and therefore fair use, which is different from church use per se?
Absolutely. You've
Okay.
got it in one.
Okay.
It is. Yeah.
Okay, great. So the other questions are basically, okay, so if I'm going to do my own translation of a song, or if I'm going to do my own arrangement of a song, is that, so I guess the answer is, for everything that you do and you're using somebody else's idea, you still need to get permission, correct?
Yeah.
Even if it's for background music, even if it's for Zoom, get permission. I think it's something that it's pure politeness. I think if you create something and somebody else is going to use it, the nice thing to do, the right thing to do would just to ask for permission lah, no matter what you're going to do with it.
And that's why I started by saying, think of copyright as someone's car, and you would never get into someone's car and drive it without getting their permission. So similarly, don't use their music without getting their permission. But like I said, if you're going to do your own arrangement, you need to get permission to use their music, but copyright attaches to the new arrangement.
So then you become the copyright owner of that recording.
Yeah. Of that arrangement. You become the copyright owner of that arrangement.
All right, great. Thank you so much for all the questions that have been coming in. A lot of good comments. They've been saying thank you so much. It's been great. And a lot of solid content that I think a lot of times it's just very blurry and hazy. So before we close, any last words, Shamla?
No, I mean, thank you so much to you, JUWITA, for moderating, and for Integrity and LiveWire and all the other organizations for inviting me. I'm so happy to be part of this. And, I am still reachable. A bit hard for 200 people to reach me, but I'm still reachable. So, I'm happy to assist. And at the end of the day, I think all of us are trying to do what is right, and to be set apart people, to be holy people, to do what is right so that we can glorify God.
Amen.
Process. So, just go out and glorify Him.
Amen. That's so good. Such a good closing. So thank you once again to everybody who's been tuning in, all 200 people of you, and for staying for the entire duration. It's been a great time. Good questions as well. Before we close, just a couple of announcements. We are going to be doing this for the next 3 nights. So tomorrow we are covering an introduction to CCLI and their roles. So again, CCLI is the Christian Copyright Licensing International. Okay, so if you've got questions about, how do I get this licensing for my church, for streaming, the right people will be here at 9 p.m. to answer all your very, very specific questions. Now, also, if you were blessed by what you've been hearing, you can always give a love gift to LiveWire to support the ministry. The details are on your screen right now. So take a screenshot. Yeah. And feel free to bless. And that is about it. So thank you once again for streaming. Do the right thing. Honor God with what you do, and He will multiply the works of your hands. Amen. So we are signing off from the first episode of this series. Good night and God bless. Thanks again, Sharmila.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.